Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and welcome me back to the channel. I know I haven't uploaded in a long time, aside from like that video I uploaded the other week, which wasn't really like content for the channel. Now before I get into the subject matter of the video, I do want to preface this by saying that on this channel I usually recommend like almost every book I review. And even with some of the less like confident recommendations, I can't like outright not recommend something from the ancient world, like a book from the ancient world, because even with the so-called like bad ones in terms of like entertainment or something, or even like inaccuracy, you still learn something about the ancient world from them. So if I decline to recommend something on this channel and it's not from like the modern world, it's usually because its subject matter will be so niche that I don't think the majority of my audience would really care about it. The other time this might happen is if a book gives the wrong impression or the wrong idea about a certain topic. And in that case, this is kind of where I'm heading to in this video. Now, for the most part, Plutarch is actually one of my favorite authors of all time. His biographies of Greek and Roman figures is great. They're awesome. I would recommend those. He also has this really large corpus of philosophical texts called the Moralia, where he writes about a whole bunch of subjects. And I say they're like philosophical, they're really about like all sorts of things. Like there's like science kind of discussions in there, and kind of collections of certain like quotations, for example. And one of these actually is the subject of today's video, the sayings of the Spartans. To give a brief background on the sayings of the Spartans, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a collection of quotations from ancient Spartan people. It's technically two parts. It's saying of the Spartans and then saying of Spartan women, but they're both pretty much the same thing. And it's an interesting work because it's almost like a companion piece to the biographies of Spartan figures that Plutarch had written for the parallel lives. Plutarch is someone who's really interested in like morals and kind of character, and those kind of themes are what are the crux of the parallel lives, and it's also the crux of this work. And so in that regard, it's almost like a companion piece in that they both kind of hit upon the same subject. Now, the key difference between the sayings and, say, like any particular biography from the parallel lives is the subject matter of the sayings deals with an entire group of people. Even though each quotation is obviously from a single person, there are so many different people that are included in the sayings that you end up getting a view of like an entire culture's kind of like sentimentalities. And that's kind of what Plutarch wants to be doing here, as a lot of the sayings and a lot of the quotations kind of hit upon the same kind of themes and sentimentalities of Spartan people. Two of the biggest themes of this, for example, are the kind of laconic style that the Spartans employed, or supposedly employed, throughout their history. The kind of like short, kind of witty reply to some person, usually like an outsider who thinks they're like gonna get one up on the Spartans, and then the Spartan guy or the Spartan woman will like come back with like this short little zinger, and it's supposed to show like all the Spartans talked like this, and it's also supposed to show like their unique style of wit, in other words. The quotations also kind of hit upon what Plutarch identified as the key kind of moral values of the Spartans, right? This kind of like austere, virtuous lifestyle. And before I get into like why I wouldn't recommend reading it, I will say it is like a fun read. Like you get some real like zingers in there that can be fun. Like for example, one of the ones that's included is before the Battle of Thermopylae. You have the Spartan soldier who tells the Persian, like when the Persians say, "Oh, we'll fire so much arrows that will block out the sun," and then the Spartan guy comes back with like, "Okay, then we'll fight in the shade." That's in Herodotus, but that's also in here, and you have a lot of examples that kind of are similar to that kind of like setup and execution. But the problem with the sayings of the Spartans, though, is something that I kind of alluded to earlier, which is that it gives a kind of a inaccurate impression of Spartan society. It kind of it's more like a kind of stereotypical outsider view of the Spartans that isn't, as far as we can tell, accurate. And I say as far as we can tell because we don't really have any good sources for the Spartans. We have almost no primary sources, and we have almost no primary sources, and we have zero primary sources past a certain date. Like I think once you get into the classical era, it's like none. And so all of our sources are kind of based off of these kind of outsider impressions. This is something that this kind of stereotypical view of the Spartans is actually like a serious kind of like, I don't even know, like a phenomenon in Spartan and ancient Greek studies known as the Spartan mirage, where the kind of myth of the Spartans, so to speak, has become so pervasive that it's hard to kind of like separate it from the truth. Because again, we don't really have any good primary sources aside from like really scant archaeological evidence. And when it comes to the Spartan mirage, the sayings of the Spartans is the work that kind of gets hit the hardest, because Plutarch will just include anything, no matter how accurate or inaccurate it is. Because again, he doesn't know better, and he really can't, because there's nothing really to work with. Um, and the biggest example of this, the best way to exemplify this is to list an example. One of the most famous quotes from the Spartans is the mother who talks to her son who's about to go to battle, and she says, "Listen, son," I'm paraphrasing, obviously. "Listen, son, return with your shield or return on your shield," implying, hey, return, alive and victorious and you're bringing your shield back, or return dead, and dead you'll be carried back on your shield. It serves as like a nice quote, a nice little like somber quote about like the Spartan mentality of them going to war and all that. But the problem is that we know for a fact, one of the few things we know for a fact, in fact, is that when Spartans died in battle, they were usually buried like right there on the battlefield. There was no like carrying them back on their shields type of thing. And in fact, Plutarch himself will write in other spots about how the Spartans didn't really like have that elaborate have any kind of elaborate funeral practices or anything like that. And there are a lot of other quotes like this that can be similarly called into question. And again, I don't want to blame Plutarch too much, but the facts are the facts. Now, you may be wondering, like, well, okay, what about his biographies of certain Spartan individuals? Do they have similar issues? And I would have to say yes. The difference, though, is that when he's writing the biographies, as bad as a lot of the sources here he's working with can be, he's still bringing in a lot more sources because it's like a full-on biography. It's not just like a collection of the same type of thing. Um, and a lot of them too, a lot of the figures he writes about too, spent a ton of time outside of Sparta, where they would run into other people, and then you can more easily verify certain aspects of their life or certain time periods of their life. You can take the king Agesilaus II, for example. He spends a ton of time on campaign in other parts of Greece and even in like the Persian Empire at some point. And so you have a lot more people he runs into. A lot more historians can kind of write about him. So it's better in that regard. Overall, I would have to not recommend the sayings of the Spartans if you want to actually learn like real info about the Spartans. Again, it's hard to do so, but I think reading it will give you an misleading impression of what the Spartans were like. Read his biographies; those are fine. And if you want to learn about the Spartan Mirage specifically, I would recommend them, but I'm going to guess and say that the vast majority of my audience would not really want to learn about the Spartan Mirage specifically. It's a reception study. You want to learn. You want to know like as verifiable information as possible. I'm guessing. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I'd be curious to see if any of you have actually read them, and do you agree with my assessment? Do you agree with my assessment that they're entertaining? Because again, they're really entertaining. They're like these nice little like quippy quotes, just not like good historical material. And yeah, but other than that, I will see you guys in the next video. My next video, or one of my next videos, because it is actually kind of a little bit more involved than what I've usually been putting out with, is kind of a bigger project, and it's not really going to be a review. I don't want to spoil it too much, but I kind of want to give a little teaser. How should I put this? It is a recommendation of a recommendation on how to read a certain really famous author. So stay tuned. It's going to be a longer video, probably, but yeah, stay tuned for that. But yeah, thank you guys. Like this video, like the previous video too, even though it doesn't really pertain to anything, and subscribe and do all that.